The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Whitmore Palace as King Edmund stood at his office window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the royal gardens. At 68, he had seen many changes during his reign, but none felt as urgent as the environmental crisis facing his kingdom. His weathered hands held a thick folder of reports about rising sea levels, disappearing forests, and the struggles of wildlife across the realm. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "Your Majesty, Prince Alexander has arrived for your meeting," announced his private secretary, Margaret Thornfield, who had served the royal family for over 20 years. "Send him in, Margaret, and please hold all calls for the next hour." Prince Alexander entered with the confident stride of a man who had spent years balancing royal duty with personal passion. At 42, he had earned respect not just for his title, but for his genuine commitment to environmental causes. His dark hair showed hints of gray at the temples, and his green eyes reflected the same determination his father recognized in himself at that age. "Father," Alexander said, offering a respectful nod before taking a seat across from the king's mahogany desk. "Alexander, thank you for coming. I know you have a busy schedule with the children's hospital visit this afternoon." King Edmund set down the folder and studied his son's face. "I have something important to discuss with you." The prince leaned forward slightly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" King Edmund gestured toward the folder. "The Environmental Protection Agency has invited us to visit the Greendale Restoration Project next week. It's the largest wetland restoration effort in our kingdom's history. They specifically requested both of us to attend." Alexander's eyebrows rose. It was unusual for father and son to attend official engagements together unless it was a major state occasion. "Both of us? That's quite rare, isn't it?" "Very rare," the king agreed. "In fact, I can't remember the last time we did a joint environmental engagement." But Margaret Reynolds, the project director, made a compelling case. She believes that seeing both the current monarch and the heir apparent working together on environmental issues would send a powerful message to the public. The prince considered this carefully. "What kind of message are we hoping to send?" King Edmund stood and walked to a large map of the kingdom hanging on the wall. He pointed to a green area marked with various symbols. Greendale was once a thriving wetland ecosystem. Over the past 50 years, industrial development and poor land management turned it into a wasteland. The restoration project has been running for 3 years now, and the results are remarkable. Wildlife has returned, water quality has improved, and local communities are seeing economic benefits from ecotourism. "I've heard about Greendale," Alexander said, joining his father at the map. "The reports say they've managed to bring back species that were nearly extinct in that region." "Exactly, and that's where our message comes in." The king turned to face his son directly. "Climate change and environmental destruction don't respect borders or timelines. This isn't just my problem or your problem. It's a challenge that spans generations. By appearing together, we show the kingdom that environmental protection is a continuous effort, something that connects the past, present, and future of our monarchy." Alexander nodded slowly, understanding the deeper implications. "You're talking about continuity, showing that environmental responsibility isn't just a trend or a political position, but a fundamental part of who we are as a nation." "Precisely. The people need to see that this commitment doesn't change with each generation. It grows stronger." The prince walked to the window, looking out at the same gardens his father had been observing earlier. "What would our role be at the site? I assume this isn't just a ribbon-cutting ceremony." King Edmund smiled for the first time during their conversation. Margaret suggested we participate in some hands-on activities, planting native species, meeting with local volunteers, touring the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. She wants us to get our hands dirty, literally. "I like that approach," Alexander said. "People are tired of seeing royalty just standing around looking official. They want to see genuine involvement." "There's another aspect to consider," the king added. "The international environmental community will be watching. Representatives from 12 nations are attending, including some countries we're hoping to convince to join our new Green Alliance initiative. Alexander turned back toward his father, a new understanding in his expression. This isn't just about domestic policy, is it? This is diplomatic too. Everything we do has diplomatic implications these days, King Edmund replied. But, yes, this engagement could help us build stronger international partnerships on environmental issues. Your reputation in environmental circles could be particularly valuable. The prince had spent years building relationships with environmental organizations, scientists, and activists around the world. His doctoral thesis on sustainable agriculture had earned academic recognition, and his foundation's work in renewable energy had gained international attention. When is the engagement scheduled? Alexander asked. Next Thursday. It would be a full-day commitment, starting with a morning briefing, followed by the site visit, lunch with project volunteers, and ending with a press conference. Prince Alexander was quiet for a moment, mentally reviewing his schedule. I can make it work. Caroline will need to reschedule a few things, but this feels important. King Edmund felt a wave of pride watching his son's immediate commitment. I hope you'd say that. Margaret is preparing a detailed briefing package for both of us. The more knowledgeable we are about the technical aspects, the more credible our support will appear. I'd like to invite Dr. Sarah Chun to join our preparation team, Alexander suggested. She's a marine biologist who consulted on my foundation's coastal protection project. Her expertise could be valuable. Excellent idea. I'll have Margaret coordinate with her office. As their meeting concluded, both men felt the weight and promise of the upcoming engagement. They were about to embark on something unprecedented, a joint royal environmental initiative that could influence both public opinion and international policy. Father, Alexander said as he prepared to leave, I think this could be the beginning of something significant. King Edmund nodded, looking once again toward the palace gardens where his groundskeepers continued their careful work. I believe you're right, son. I believe you're right. The royal convoy wound through the countryside toward Greendale, passing fields that told the story of both environmental damage and hope. King Edmund and Prince Alexander rode together in the lead vehicle, reviewing their briefing materials one final time. The morning air was crisp, and patches of morning mist still clung to the valleys they passed through. Look at that. Prince Alexander pointed toward a hillside where rows of young trees created geometric patterns against the landscape. That's part of the National Reforestation Program we launched 2 years ago. King Edmund followed his son's gaze. How many trees have been planted so far? Just over 2 million, with another million planned for next spring. The Forestry Service says we're ahead of schedule. Alexander's voice carried genuine satisfaction. The local communities have been incredible. Some villages have organized weekend planning parties for families. Their car phone rang, and Margaret Thornfield's voice came through the speaker. Your Majesty, we're receiving updates from the advance team. Dr. Reynolds is ready for your arrival, and the international observers have all checked in. The weather is holding perfectly. Thank you, Margaret. Any changes to our schedule? The king asked. One addition, sir. A group of local school children have requested to present you with letters about environmental protection. Dr. Reynolds suggests incorporating them into the tree planting ceremony. King Edmund looked at his son, who nodded enthusiastically. Of course, children's voices are often the most powerful when it comes to environmental issues. As they continued their journey, Prince Alexander shared some unexpected news. I received a call yesterday from Professor Williams at the Royal University. He wants to document our visit for a new educational program about royal environmental leadership. Interesting. What kind of documentation? A behind-the-scenes look at how environmental policy develops at the highest levels of government. He's particularly interested in how traditional monarchy adapts to modern environmental challenges. King Edmund considered this. Throughout his reign, he had been careful about allowing too much scrutiny of royal decision-making processes. But environmental issues felt different, more urgent, and universal. What's your opinion? He asked his son. I think transparency could work in our favor here. People want to see authentic commitment, not just ceremonial appearances. If we let them see how seriously we take these issues, it might inspire similar seriousness in others. 20 minutes later, their convoy crested a hill, and the Greendale site came into view. The transformation was remarkable. Where briefing photos had shown barren, damaged land, they now saw a thriving ecosystem. Wetlands sparkled in the morning sun, surrounded by carefully planned walking trails and observation platforms. Native grasses swayed in the breeze, and, even from a distance, they could see various bird species that had returned to the area. Dr. Margaret Reynolds waited at the site entrance with her team and the international observers. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that suggested someone more comfortable in the field than in formal meetings. Her reputation as one of the kingdom's leading environmental scientists preceded her. "Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness," she greeted them as they stepped from their vehicle. "Welcome to Greendale. I can't tell you how honored we are to have you both here today." King Edmund shook her hand warmly. "Dr. Reynolds, the honor is ours. What we've seen of your work here is truly inspiring." Prince Alexander was already looking toward the wetlands with obvious interest. "Dr. Reynolds, I've read about your innovative water filtration systems. I'm eager to see them in action." "We'll start there," she replied, leading them toward a wooden walkway that extended into the wetland area. "But first, I want you to meet some of the people who made this possible." She introduced them to a diverse group of volunteers, scientists, and local community leaders. There was James Martinez, a former factory worker whose plant had closed due to environmental regulations, but who now worked as a site coordinator. Sarah Ahmed was a local teacher who brought her students for monthly environmental education visits. Dr. Eric Thompson was an international wetlands specialist from Canada who had volunteered 6 months of his time to the project. "This is what I want people to understand," Dr. Reynolds explained as they walked. "Environmental restoration isn't just about science and technology. It's about bringing communities together around a shared purpose." They reached the first observation platform, which offered a clear view of the water filtration systems Prince Alexander had mentioned. The setup was ingenious, a series of constructed wetlands that naturally cleaned contaminated water through biological processes before it entered the main ecosystem. "The water entering this system was severely polluted when we started," Dr. Reynolds explained. "High levels of industrial chemicals, agricultural runoff, heavy metals. Now, after passing through a natural filtration process, it meets or exceeds national water quality standards." King Edmund leaned over the railing to get a closer look. "How long does the process take?" "Typically 72 to 96 hours for complete treatment. The beauty is that it's self-sustaining once established. The plants and microorganisms do all the work." Prince Alexander was taking notes and asking detailed technical questions that impressed the international observers. His background in environmental science was clearly genuine, not just ceremonial knowledge. Their next stop was the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where they met creatures that were being prepared for release back into the restored habitat. A young veterinarian named Lisa Park showed them orphaned otter pups that would soon be old enough to survive on their own. "These little ones were found when their habitat was still too damaged to support them," she explained. "Now that the ecosystem is restored, we can release them back where they belong." King Edmund watched one of the pups play in a small pool. "How do you know when they're ready?" "They need to demonstrate they can hunt, avoid predators, and navigate the waterways independently. It usually takes about 6 months of rehabilitation." Prince Alexander had knelt down to get a closer look at the animals. The connection between habitat restoration and wildlife recovery is remarkable. You're not just fixing the environment, you're bringing back entire communities of species. The morning's activities had attracted attention from local media and environmental groups. A small crowd had gathered near the visitor center, including the school children Margaret had mentioned. Their letters were handwritten, decorated with drawings of trees, animals, and clean water. 8-year-old Emma Watson stepped forward with obvious nervousness to present the first letter. "Your Majesty," she began in a small voice, "we want to thank you for helping save the animals' homes. My letter is about the fish in our river." King Edmund knelt down to her level. "Emma, I would be honored to read your letter. What did you want to tell me about the fish?" Her nervousness evaporated as she began talking about the trout that had returned to local streams and how her grandfather, who was a fisherman, had cried with joy when he saw them again. Prince Alexander engaged with the other children, discussing their drawings and listening to their concerns about pollution and climate change. Their questions were remarkably sophisticated, reflecting environmental education that hadn't existed when he was their age. One boy asked, "Prince Alexander, will there still be polar bears when I'm grown up?" The prince paused, considering how to give an honest but hopeful answer. "That depends on the choices we all make starting right now." Projects like this one at Greendale show us that we can heal damaged environments. But we need everyone, kids like you, your parents, leaders like my father, and me, working together. As the morning progressed, it became clear that this engagement was unlike any either royal had experienced before. The combination of technical learning, hands-on activity, and genuine community interaction created an energy that felt both purposeful and inspiring. Dr. Reynolds gathered the group for their final morning activity, the tree planting ceremony. Each tree they would plant was native to the region and specifically chosen to support the returning wildlife populations. These oak saplings will provide food and shelter for dozens of species, she explained, handing each royal a shovel. In 50 years, there'll be magnificent trees that your grandchildren might visit. As King Edmund and Prince Alexander began digging, the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. They were literally planting seeds for the future, creating something that would outlast their own lives. The international observers were taking extensive notes and photos. This kind of hands-on royal environmental leadership was exactly what many countries were seeking to model. "This is just the beginning of our day," Prince Alexander said, pausing in his digging to address the crowd. "But already, I can see why this project has captured international attention. This is what environmental leadership looks like." The afternoon brought unexpected challenges that would test both the royal commitment and the project's resilience. As King Edmund and Prince Alexander finished their lunch with project volunteers, Dr. Reynolds received an urgent phone call that changed the atmosphere entirely. "Your Majesty, we have a situation," she said quietly, returning to their table with a concerned expression. "There's been an accident at the upstream industrial facility. A chemical tank has ruptured and contaminated water is heading toward our site." The casual conversation around the lunch table stopped immediately. Prince Alexander set down his coffee cup. "How much time do we have?" The Environmental Protection Team estimates the contaminated water will reach our intake system in approximately 2 hours. "We need to implement emergency protocols immediately." King Edmund stood up, his formal demeanor shifting into crisis management mode. "What can we do to help?" Dr. Reynolds looked surprised by the question. Royal visits typically ended when emergencies arose. "Your Majesty, this might not be the best time for continued observation. The situation could become quite chaotic." Dr. Reynolds, Prince Alexander said firmly, "If you're willing to have us, we'd like to stay and help. This is exactly the kind of environmental challenge our kingdom faces regularly. We should understand how these emergencies are handled." The international observers exchanged glances. This was definitely not part of the planned program, but it might prove even more valuable than the scheduled activities. Dr. Reynolds made a quick decision. "All right, but you'll need to follow safety protocols exactly. James, get emergency gear for their majesties. We're going to need all hands on this." Within 15 minutes, King Edmund and Prince Alexander found themselves in protective gear, helping to redirect water flow through emergency channels that bypassed the main filtration system. The technical complexity of the operation was impressive. Multiple teams coordinated to isolate the contaminated water while maintaining the ecosystem's water supply. "The key is preventing the contaminated water from entering our restored wetlands," Dr. Reynolds explained as they worked. "We have emergency holding ponds designed for exactly this situation, but we need to manually operate the diversion systems." Prince Alexander was assigned to a team monitoring water quality sensors that would detect the contamination's arrival. King Edmund worked with volunteers to operate mechanical gates that controlled water flow between different sections of the system. "Your Majesty, called out Sarah Ahmed, the local teacher who had been introduced that morning. "Could you help me with this wheel mechanism? It controls the main diversion gate." The king immediately joined her, applying his considerable strength to turn the heavy wheel that redirected thousands of gallons of water away from the sensitive restoration area. The work was physically demanding and technically precise. Both royals found themselves sweating despite the cool afternoon air, their formal clothes replaced by work gear, their hands dirty from handling equipment. Dr. Eric Thompson, the Canadian wetland specialist, coordinated communications between different teams through a radio system. "Water quality team, what's your reading?" Prince Alexander consulted his monitoring equipment, still showing normal levels at sensor point 3. "But I'm seeing some unusual readings about a kilometer upstream." "That's expected," Dr. Thompson replied. "The contamination is approaching. Everyone prepare for implementation of Containment Protocol 7. The emergency response revealed aspects of environmental protection that never appeared in policy discussions or formal presentations. This was environmental science under pressure, requiring split-second decisions and physical endurance. King Edmund found himself working alongside James Martinez, the former factory worker turned site coordinator. "James, how often do emergencies like this occur?" "More than people realize, Your Majesty. Industrial accidents, severe weather, equipment failures. We probably deal with some kind of environmental emergency every few months. That's why we design these systems with multiple backup plans." The contaminated water arrived exactly when predicted. The monitoring equipment showed dangerous levels of industrial chemicals in the water approaching their site, but the emergency diversion system was working perfectly. The contaminated water flowed into isolated holding ponds where it would be treated before release. "It's working," announced Dr. Reynolds over the radio system. "All teams, the contamination is successfully contained. The restoration site is protected." A cheer went up from the volunteers, but the work wasn't finished. The holding ponds needed constant monitoring, and the contaminated water required extensive treatment before it could be safely released. Prince Alexander wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at his father. Both men were muddy, tired, and completely engaged in work that was far from typical royal activities. "I've learned more about environmental protection in the last 2 hours than in years of policy meetings," the king said quietly. The international observers had documented everything, and their excitement was obvious. This unplanned crisis response had demonstrated environmental leadership in action, showing how quickly and effectively a well-designed system could respond to threats. Dr. Reynolds gathered everyone for a brief assessment. "Thanks to everyone's hard work, we've prevented what could have been a significant setback for the restoration project. The contamination is contained, our ecosystems are protected, and we've successfully tested our emergency response systems under real conditions." Lisa Park, the young veterinarian, approached with an update about the wildlife. "All the animals in rehabilitation are safe. The emergency protocols worked exactly as designed to protect them from any contamination risk." As the immediate crisis passed, the group began cleaning up and assessing the afternoon's events. The school children who had presented letters earlier were still present with their parents, watching the environmental response with wide-eyed fascination. Emma Watson, the 8-year-old who had talked about fish in the river, approached Prince Alexander. "Your Royal Highness, were you scared about the bad chemicals?" Prince Alexander knelt down to her level, his work clothes muddy and his hair disheveled. "I was concerned, Emma, but not scared. Do you know why?" She shook her head. "Because I saw how well-prepared Dr. Reynolds and her team are for emergencies like this. They've thought about every possible problem and created solutions ahead of time. That's what good environmental protection looks like." King Edmund overheard the conversation and joined them. "Emma, what did you think about watching us help with the emergency?" "It was really cool. I didn't know kings and princes could work like regular people." The innocent comment made both men smile. King Edmund replied, "Environmental protection is everyone's job, Emma. It doesn't matter if you're a king or a scientist or a student like you. We all have to work together." The late afternoon brought unexpected media attention. Word of the royal participation in emergency environmental response had spread, and news crews were requesting statements about the unprecedented hands-on involvement. Dr. Reynolds suggested they address the media together, showing the collaborative approach that had made the emergency response successful. What we experience today demonstrates something crucial about environmental protection, Prince Alexander told the assembled reporters. It's not just about policy and funding, though those are important. It's about being prepared for real-world challenges and being willing to get personally involved when those challenges arise. King Edmund added, "The dedication we witness from Dr. Reynolds and her team today represents the best of our kingdom's environmental leadership. This is the kind of expertise and commitment we need to address climate change and environmental threats." One reporter asked, "Your Majesty, was this the kind of royal engagement you expected when you planned this visit?" The king smiled, looking at his muddy hands. "I expected to learn about environmental restoration. I didn't expect to participate in emergency response. But I can't think of a better way to understand the real challenges of environmental protection." As the day wound down, the emergency holding ponds were functioning perfectly, the contaminated water was being treated, and the restoration site had been completely protected. The unplanned crisis had become an unexpected demonstration of environmental leadership under pressure. Dr. Reynolds approached both royals as they prepared to depart. "Your Majesties, I hope this emergency didn't ruin your experience today." Prince Alexander shook his head. "Dr. Reynolds, this was exactly the experience we needed. Seeing environmental protection in action, under real pressure, with real consequences, that's invaluable." King Edmund nodded in agreement. "We came here to understand your work. Today we didn't just understand it, we participated in it. That changes everything." The evening brought time for reflection and planning, but the day's events had created momentum that neither King Edmund nor Prince Alexander wanted to lose. As their convoy traveled back toward the palace, both men were unusually quiet, processing what they had experienced. "Father," Prince Alexander finally said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I don't think we can go back to ceremonial environmental visits after today." King Edmund looked up from the notes he had been reviewing. "What do you mean?" "I mean that participating in real environmental work, handling actual challenges, learning from the experts while contributing meaningfully, that felt more valuable than 100 ribbon-cutting ceremonies." The king set down his papers and considered his son's words carefully. "You're talking about changing how the monarchy approaches environmental issues. I'm talking about leading by example instead of just supporting from a distance." Prince Alexander's voice carried conviction. The international observers today saw something they'd never seen before: royalty getting genuinely involved in environmental protection at the ground level. Their car phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Margaret Thornfield's voice came through the speaker with unusual excitement. "Your Majesty, we're receiving calls from environmental organizations around the world. Word of today's emergency response has spread quickly, and the reaction is overwhelmingly positive." "What kind of reaction?" King Edmund asked. "The Canadian Environmental Alliance wants to invite you both to visit their forest restoration project in British Columbia. The Australian government is requesting a meeting about collaborative wetland restoration. And the United Nations Environmental Program has asked if you would consider serving as special ambassadors for their new climate resilience initiative." Prince Alexander and King Edmund exchanged meaningful looks. The international response was exactly what they had hoped for, but happening much faster than expected. "Margaret, please set up a meeting tomorrow morning to discuss these opportunities. And contact Dr. Reynolds. I want to discuss how we can formalize a longer-term partnership with the Greendale Project." After ending the call, King Edmund turned to his son with a new expression. "Alexander, I think you're right about changing our approach. Today showed me that we can be more effective as environmental leaders than I ever realized." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about creating a new royal initiative, something that combines hands-on environmental work with our diplomatic and policy influence. A way to make our environmental commitment both more personal and more international." Prince Alexander's eyes lit up with interest. Like a Royal Environmental Service program? Exactly. Imagine if we spent several days each month working directly with environmental projects around the kingdom and internationally. Real work, real learning, real contribution. The idea was ambitious and unprecedented. Traditionally, royal environmental involvement consisted of patronages, speeches, and ceremonial appearances. Direct participation in environmental work was virtually unknown. We need to be properly trained, Prince Alexander pointed out. Today worked because Dr. Reynolds' team was patient with our inexperience. But if we're going to make this a regular practice, we need real expertise. Agreed? We could arrange training programs with leading environmental organizations. Learn proper techniques, safety protocols, scientific methods. Their car had reached the palace grounds, but neither man seemed ready to end their planning conversation. King Edmund asked the driver to take a longer route through the palace gardens, giving them more time to develop their ideas. There's another aspect to consider, Prince Alexander said thoughtfully. Public engagement. Today showed how powerful it can be when people see royalty working alongside regular citizens on shared challenges. The children's reactions were particularly striking, King Edmund agreed. Emma and the other students saw environmental protection as something real and immediate, not abstract policy. We could incorporate educational components into our environmental work. Bring school groups to observe restoration projects. Invite young people to participate in hands-on activities. The king was taking notes as they discussed possibilities. What about international collaboration? The response Margaret described suggests there's significant interest from other countries. We could establish exchange programs, send our environmental experts to work on international projects, bring foreign specialists here to learn from our successes. Create a network of environmental cooperation that goes beyond traditional diplomatic channels. As their car finally approached the palace entrance, King Edmund felt a sense of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. The day's events had revealed possibilities for royal leadership that felt both innovative and deeply meaningful. Alexander, I want you to lead the development of this initiative. You have the scientific background, the international connections, and the credibility with environmental organizations. Prince Alexander was honored, but also aware of the challenges ahead. It will require significant changes in how we structure royal duties. More flexibility in scheduling, different types of training, new security considerations for field work. All manageable problems, King Edmund replied. The more important question is whether this approach can really make a difference for environmental protection. Today convinced me it can. The international observers saw something they hadn't expected, genuine royal commitment backed up by personal involvement. That carries weight in diplomatic and policy circles. They had reached the palace entrance, where staff were waiting to brief them on evening schedules and tomorrow's commitments. But both men felt that the real important work of the day was just beginning. Margaret Thornfield met them in the main entrance hall with a thick folder of messages and requests that had accumulated during their absence. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister's office has called 3 times requesting a briefing about today's events. The international response has been remarkable, and they want to discuss how this might influence our environmental diplomacy. King Edmund took the folder, but his attention was clearly focused elsewhere. Margaret, please schedule a meeting with the Prime Minister for tomorrow afternoon. But first, I want to meet with our environmental policy team. We're going to be making some significant changes to our approach. Prince Alexander added, also, please contact the Royal University's Environmental Studies Department. I want to discuss arranging formal training programs for ongoing environmental work. Margaret looked surprised, but pleased by the intensity of their commitment. Certainly, Your Royal Highness. Shall I also follow up with Dr. Reynolds about continued collaboration? Absolutely. And, Margaret, please prepare a comprehensive analysis of our current environmental commitments. We're going to be restructuring priorities significantly. As they walked toward the king's private office, Prince Alexander reflected on how much had changed in a single day. Father, this morning we were planning a ceremonial visit to an environmental project. Tonight, we're designing a new model for royal environmental leadership. King Edmund paused at his office door. Alexander, some of the most important decisions happen when you're forced to respond to unexpected circumstances. Today's emergency response showed us what we're capable of when we fully commit to environmental protection. The question now is whether we can maintain that level of commitment as a regular practice rather than just an emergency response. That's exactly what we're going to find out. Inside the king's office, they spent 2 more hours outlining their vision for expanded royal environmental involvement. The plans they developed would require approval from government officials, coordination with environmental organizations, and significant changes in royal protocol. But both men felt convinced that today's experience had revealed a new way forward, one that could make their environmental leadership more effective, more credible, and more inspiring to others. As Prince Alexander prepared to leave for his own residence, King Edmund made one final observation. You know, Alexander, I think today we discovered something important about monarchy in the modern world. People don't just want us to support causes. They want to see us personally committed to making those causes successful. And when they see that commitment demonstrated through real work and real contribution, it changes how they think about their own responsibilities. It was nearly midnight when both men finally ended their planning session, but neither felt tired. The day had been physically demanding and emotionally intense, but it had also been profoundly energizing. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of their effort to transform royal environmental involvement from ceremonial support to hands-on leadership. The international attention generated by today's events had created an opportunity, but success would depend on their ability to deliver meaningful results over the long term. 3 months later, the transformation in royal environmental engagement had exceeded everyone's expectations. King Edmund stood in the same palace office where he had first proposed the joint visit to Greendale, but the room now looked completely different. Environmental maps covered the walls, showing restoration projects across the kingdom and international collaboration sites. Technical manuals sat alongside traditional royal correspondence, and muddy boots stood next to polished formal shoes in the corner. Prince Alexander entered the office wearing field clothes rather than a formal suit, carrying a tablet displaying real-time water quality data from 3 different restoration sites. Father, the morning reports from our project sites are remarkable. The Scottish Highlands reforestation is ahead of schedule. The coastal wetland restoration in Wales is attracting species we hadn't expected for another year, and the international team working in Norway has achieved their 6-month goals in 4 months. King Edmund looked up from his own environmental reports with satisfaction. The Royal Environmental Initiative they had launched after the Greendale visit had become a model for hands-on royal leadership that other monarchies were now seeking to copy. Any word from Dr. Reynolds about the anniversary event at Greendale? She's confirmed everything for next week. The site has become so successful that environmental scientists from 15 countries are requesting visits. The emergency response protocols we helped develop that first day have been implemented at restoration sites worldwide. Margaret Thornfield knocked and entered with her usual efficiency, but her demeanor had adapted to the new royal priorities. She now carried environmental briefings alongside traditional royal correspondence and had become surprisingly knowledgeable about restoration techniques and climate science. Your Majesty, I have updates from yesterday's Parliamentary Environmental Committee meeting. They're requesting a formal presentation about the Royal Environmental Initiative's results. Also, the children from Greendale Elementary have sent new letters, and Dr. Chun from the Marine Biology Institute wants to discuss expanding the Coastal Protection Program. King Edmund smiled at the mention of the children's letters. Emma Watson and her classmates have become regular correspondents, sharing their observations about environmental changes in their local area and asking increasingly sophisticated questions about conservation science. What did Emma write about this time? Prince Alexander asked. Margaret consulted her notes. She wants to know if the restoration techniques you're using could help with the damaged coral reefs she saw on a documentary. She's drawn diagrams of what she thinks underwater restoration might look like. The transformation in public engagement have been one of the most rewarding aspects of their new approach. Children across the kingdom had begun seeing environmental protection as an active, achievable goal rather than an abstract concern. Schools were requesting visits from royal environmental teams, and young people were volunteering for restoration projects in unprecedented numbers. Schedule time for me to respond personally to Emma and the other children, King Edmund said. Their questions often lead to insights our scientific advisors haven't considered. The morning brought a video conference with international environmental leaders who had been inspired by the royal hands-on approach. Representatives from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and several European kingdoms were comparing notes on implementing similar programs. Dr. Sarah Chun, the marine biologist who had become a key advisor to the initiative, joined them for the call. Her expertise had proven invaluable in expanding royal environmental work beyond land-based restoration to include marine ecosystems. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, came the voice of Dr. Patricia Williams from the Canadian Environmental Alliance. Our Prime Minister wants to formalize an exchange program based on your model. Canadian royalty and environmental teams would work on restoration projects in your kingdom, while your teams would assist with forest restoration in British Columbia. Prince Alexander responded enthusiastically. Dr. Williams, we're very interested. Our teams have learned as much from international collaboration as from domestic projects. Cross-border environmental work seems to produce better results for everyone involved. The international expansion had created diplomatic benefits beyond environmental protection. Traditional formal diplomacy was being supplemented by practical cooperation that built genuine relationships between countries. Environmental challenges that crossed national boundaries were being addressed through collaborative work rather than just policy negotiations. Dr. Chun added her perspective. The marine restoration projects have shown similar benefits from international cooperation. Pollution and climate change don't respect national boundaries, so restoration efforts need to be coordinated across regions. After the international call, King Edmund and Prince Alexander walked through the palace gardens to discuss the afternoon schedule. The gardens themselves have become a demonstration site for sustainable landscaping techniques, featuring native plants, rainwater collection systems, and habitat areas for local wildlife. Alexander, I've been thinking about the long-term impact of what we've started. 3 months ago, royal environmental involvement meant attending ceremonies and making supportive speeches. Now we're part of an international network of hands-on environmental leaders. The credibility factor has been crucial, Prince Alexander replied. When we speak about environmental policy now, everyone knows we've done the actual work. We understand the challenges from direct experience. They paused near a pond where native fish species were thriving in carefully maintained habitat. A group of young royal staff members were conducting their weekly water quality testing, part of the training program that had been established to support expanded environmental work. The staff development aspect has been unexpected but valuable, King Edmund observed. Half our employees now have basic environmental science training. The palace has become a learning center as much as a royal residence. Their afternoon was scheduled for visits to 2 restoration sites where royal teams were working alongside environmental scientists and community volunteers. These visits have become routine, but each one brought new learning opportunities and chances to refine their techniques. The first stop was an urban air quality improvement project in the capital city, where they were testing innovative approaches to reducing pollution through strategic urban forestry and green building techniques. The second was a river restoration project where damaged waterways were being returned to health through natural restoration methods. At the urban forestry, Ahmed Hassan, an urban planning specialist who had helped design green spaces that served both environmental and social functions. The trees they planted provided air purification while creating community gathering spaces and supporting urban wildlife. Your Majesty, Dr. Hassan explained as they planted native saplings. These urban forests will process thousands of pounds of air pollutants annually while providing cooling that reduces energy needs for surrounding buildings. Prince Alexander was monitoring air quality sensors that tracked real-time improvements from their work. The data shows measurable improvements in air quality within hours of completing tree installations. The immediate impact is remarkable. Local residents had joined the planning work, creating the kind of community engagement that had become a hallmark of Royal Environmental projects. Children from nearby schools were learning about urban ecology while contributing to environmental improvement in their own neighborhoods. The river restoration site presented different challenges, but similar opportunities for hands-on learning. King Edmund worked with a team removing invasive plant species that were disrupting native ecosystems, while Prince Alexander assisted with installing structures that would improve water flow and create habitat for returning fish populations. The key principle, explained Dr. Martinez, the site coordinator, is working with natural processes rather than against them. We're not imposing human solutions on natural systems. We're removing human interference and letting natural systems restore themselves. The work was physically demanding and technically complex, requiring knowledge of hydrology, biology, chemistry, and engineering. Both royals had developed genuine expertise through months of hands-on experience supplemented by formal training programs. As afternoon turned to evening, they completed their field work and joined community members for dinner at a local community center. These informal gatherings had become important opportunities for direct conversation with citizens about environmental priorities and challenges. Emma Watson's grandmother approached King Edmund during dinner. "Your Majesty, I wanted to thank you for encouraging Emma's interest in environmental science. She's decided she wants to study marine biology like Dr. Chan when she grows up. Emma is asking excellent questions about coral reef restoration," the king replied. "Young people like her give me hope about environmental protection in the future." The evening concluded with a planning session for the next month's environmental projects. International requests were requiring careful coordination, and domestic restoration sites needed ongoing royal support to maintain momentum. "Father," Prince Alexander said as they reviewed their expanding schedule, "I think we've proven that hands-on environmental leadership works. The question now is how to expand this approach without diluting its effectiveness." King Edmund considered the challenge carefully. Success had created demand that was beginning to exceed their capacity to respond personally to every opportunity. "Perhaps it's time to train other royal family members in environmental work. Your cousins have expressed interest, and several have relevant educational backgrounds. I like that idea. We could create a Royal Environmental Corps, multiple family members trained in different specialties, able to work on several projects simultaneously." As they concluded their planning, both men reflected on how much had changed since that first joint visit to Greendale. What had begun as an unusual ceremonial appearance had evolved into a new model for royal leadership that was being studied and copied internationally. The transformation had required significant changes in royal protocol, staff training, security procedures, and diplomatic relationships. But the results had exceeded all expectations, creating environmental progress, international cooperation, public engagement, and a new form of monarchy that felt both relevant and inspiring. "Alexander," King Edmund said as they prepared to end their long day, "I think we've discovered something important about leadership in the modern world. People don't just want leaders who support causes. They want leaders who demonstrate personal commitment through direct action. And when they see that demonstration, it changes their own sense of what's possible." The next morning would bring new environmental challenges and new opportunities to apply the lessons they had learned. But tonight, both men felt confident that they had found a way forward that honored royal tradition while addressing urgent contemporary needs. The rare double act that had begun as an experimental joint visit had become a permanent transformation in royal environmental leadership, creating ripple effects that would influence environmental protection efforts for generations to come.